Kino Loy is one of the best characters in Andor, and some fans are going wild over a new theory that links him to Snoke. Strap yourselves in, guys, because we're going to break down this theory to see if it's actually possible. It's time to reopen some of the wounds left behind from the sequel trilogy.
Let the past die.
We'll start by taking out anything that doesn't work, and then we'll add in some bits that put more weight behind the theory itself. And we'll close up looking at if Lucasfilm would actually do this, because part of me thinks, given the opportunity, they would change Snoke's backstory. But first we need to see if this theory actually makes sense, and it starts with Kino Loy being captured by the Empire just after we leave him in episode 10. And if, like me, you're quite invested in the character of Kino at this point, then you've probably heard some of the many theories about what happens to him next, and his possible involvement within Star Wars going forwards. Regardless of what Tony Gilroy or Andy Serkis say regarding Kino and Snoke, the decision to link the two lies solely with Lucasfilm, and they love interconnectivity if they think they can pull it off. So like a lot of the theories, this one begins with Kino actually entering the water. Whether he had help from other prisoners or risked it alone, it doesn't really matter too much, because the Empire end up recapturing him, so perhaps he injured himself during a jump, or because he actually couldn't swim, he kind of just struggled around at the bottom for a little while before being scooped back up. The theory goes on to say that eventually Kino ends up being sent off to Palpatine, presumably to one of his cloning facilities, which could be the one on Exegol, or something like the one we saw in Navarro in The Mandalorian Season 2 Episode 4. Now right away we have to think, yes, the prisoner breakout is a big deal, but why would a prisoner get an audience with the Emperor of the Galaxy? It's hardly like he's a threat to him on his own, and they could just kill him there and then. But here's where we need to look at what Palpatine is actually focusing on at this point in time. And it turns out he's heavily focused on cloning, the whole cheat and death idea that he devoted most of his life trying to achieve. So if Palpatine is looking at running experiments, it's a fair idea that he'd want some guinea pigs to use for testing or whatnot. Someone who, if they went missing from the galaxy, no one would be looking for him, and no questions would be raised. Something I want to add here as well is Snoke was a Strandcast clone of Palpatine, which means he wasn't created from the use of a single donor, like let's say the clones on Kamino were. He had multiple donors, so we don't know what or who they were, so parts of it could have come from Grogu or Luke Skywalker's severed hand or someone else. And they potentially need a base template to start the whole process with, and maybe whoever that turns out to be doesn't actually need to be Force sensitive themselves. As the theory goes on to say, Kino is taken to Palpatine and experimented on for years and years, tortured, tormented and mutated, and even at some point injected with midichlorians, which could have come from Palpatine himself while he was still alive, or it could have come from Luke's hand, or even Grogu, with the whole story of the Mandalorian coming into play. If the idea of Kino Loy's character having such a tragic life after prison doesn't sit right with you, then you better get comfy a chair, because there's more. The idea is that his head is so mashed up and scrambled at this point, he doesn't actually remember himself anymore, who he once was, therefore fully believing himself to be this old being called Snoke. No recollection of ever being Kino Loy, the floor manager on level 5. But there are still some issues that need to be ironed out here. When we're on Exegol in episode 9, we see multiple copies of Snoke inside the cloning pods, so would they technically all have different base templates or what? Well, for me, if we're saying this theory is true, then it's possible that Palpatine or whoever was directly overseeing the experiments of Snoke at this point were particularly happy with what they developed, or it was really the only functional one they could make, and they probably would have made backups by cloning the original version. So if Snoke was ever killed prematurely, they could just roll out another one. Kind of like if you ever worked on a project on your computer and being paranoid something's going to go wrong, you make backup copies of it in case of an emergency. And I guess Palpatine worked out how to consistently create Force-sensitive beings, which would then lead you to ask yourself, why didn't he just create an army of Snokes to dominate the galaxy? We're not going to sink into that rabbit hole today, but let's just say he liked the idea of Star Destroyers. And I want to add in some of my own take on this, because if this did turn out to be true, you can probably kiss goodbye to a proportion of the fandom and Tony Gilroy ever having anything to do with Star Wars ever again. Even though this theory would actually make Snoke's backstory much better in my opinion, it would hugely take away from the character that Gilroy has developed in Kino. And I think that character was created purely for the purpose of developing the Cassian Andor character throughout Series 1, and there are various characters Cassian becomes involved with that all have an impact on him in some kind of way, and we're yet to even see him read Nimic's journal. It's also important to note here that the director of Episode 10 and Andy Serkis, the actor who portrayed Kino and voiced Snoke, haven't ruled out Kino returning in the future, and I really like the idea of Kino making it off the prison one way or the other, actually joining up the rebellion and being one of the key figures of the rebellion for a few years, really helping to get it off the ground and become more established before meeting his demise somehow before Rogue One. For me, that's pretty cool, because the character and the actor are far too good to just leave in a prison never to be seen again. and it's quite obvious that Kino Loy carries all of the attributes the rebellion needs at this stage, and being a leader and a hero already ticks Luthen's boxes when he goes out recruiting. I would love to see a spin-off show focusing on a certain section of the rebellion, maybe a year before Rogue One, whether it's purely based around the pilots, the spies, whatever. I think with Kino involved, it's bound to get a lot of attention from the fans. Of course, that's just my take on things. The people in charge could look at things very differently, and they probably will, and if they did decide to go down this road with Kino and Snoke to enhance the story they invested so much money in originally, then there's always a possibility, but it would massively undermine what Gilroy is trying to build here, I think. And to be honest, he probably doesn't have much of a clue of what or who Snoke actually is. Officially, we don't know what's going on with Kino at the moment, other than he's not dead, as we didn't see it on screen, and that's what the people involved within Andor are saying. I think there's definitely a possibility of getting more Kino in a few years' time, perhaps in Season 2, and I think a spin-off show of Kino becoming a rebel pilot would be dope. If you want to dig into more speculation about Kino Loy, then make sure to check out this video I done recently right here. Make sure to subscribe to catch more, and may the Force be with you.